Hello, and thank you for tuning into Answers from the Lab, where we share Mayo Clinic knowledge and advancements on the state of testing and science from laboratory leaders and the people that are making it happen behind the scenes. I'm Dr. Bobbi Pritt, chair of the Division of Clinical Microbiology at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And with me today is Dr. Bill Morice, the president and CEO of Mayo Clinic Laboratories. Hi, Bill. Welcome back.
Hi, Bobbi. It's good to see you as always.
Hope you're having a great summer and, staying away from those ticks and mosquitoes, like I always tell you.
Yes, I've been trying to avoid those arthropods, those critters that love to feed on us in one way, shape, or bite us in one way, shape, or form. I'm actually at ADLM right now this
Oh,
week.
you are?
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we will have to catch up on a future session and talk about what you've learned, but I am guessing you're seeing a lot of AI.
Yes. Yes. Even, went to a talk this morning on AI and the responsible use of AI in the laboratory and what are some things we should be thinking about and how should societies like ADLM, participate in creating standards or expectations. And then a lot on the manufacturers as well, right? All the diagnostic manufacturers. It is certainly the parlance of the day. It is the AI is the thing.
Well, I've been reading a lot about some new innovations in AI. It's really changing the way people live and work, how they make reservations, how they plan their vacations. And from a healthcare standpoint, it's really driving scientific discovery, healthcare changes. And an article that really caught my eye was recently about Mayo Clinic having an AI tool to identify dementia based on brain scans.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's work being done here at Mayo Clinic, I believe by Dr. Jones. I'd have to double check that because it's been a little bit since I met. I've known him. Interestingly, his wife is a broadcast journalist, I think, with public radio and has interviewed some of us in the past. Anyways, but he is a neurologist that has worked on a tool that can, from brain scans, really measure volume of different parts of the brain and changes in comparison to normals and other age-related changes that can diagnose. Because we think of dementia as kind of one thing, or maybe Alzheimer's disease and a couple other things. There's a whole host of different dementias that affect different parts of the brain. And he's developed a tool that can do that reliably, which is really quite exciting.
Yeah, it's really neat. From the article, and we can include a link to that with this podcast, is that it uses brain activity patterns using something called fluorodeoxyglucose positron emission tomography, which is basically an FDG PET scan. Some people may have heard of PET scans, and it shows how the brain uses glucose for energy. And like you said, it identifies actually more accurately than a human in some situations, 9 different types of dementia, including Alzheimer's.
Yes.
And supposedly twice as fast from their data that they've shown so far with 3 times greater accuracy, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's taking the tool that shows the metabolic activity. So it's not just the volume. Then you can actually see where the brain is active or what part of the brains are less active than they should be. It's remarkable. And to your point, it supersedes any individual person's ability to look at that same information and draw the same conclusions, and it really augments clinical work and clinical decision making and clinical diagnosis.
Well, it's really kind of like we've talked about before on this podcast, is like the parasitology AI that we're using right now for finding parasites in stool specimens. It doesn't get tired. It has a discerning eye, so to speak, a metaphorical eye. And it will go and it will find these parasites, even if they're very low in number. And then in our case, it presents them to our microbiology technologists, who then get to use their advanced diagnostic skills to see if it really is a parasite or not. So I think that this is a great way of using something like AI to perhaps detect even patterns that might not even be immediately discernible to a human, but with high accuracy.
Yeah, and the thing that's really neat about like what you've described, what you've done in the parasitology lab, and then with this, it's explainable AI, right? We understand the mechanism, makes sense mechanistically, as a physician scientist, why it would be able to see this. It's not the quote black box. And even there's been great work done by Dr. Peter Noseworthy and Dr. Paul Friedman in cardiology, the same thing, where they can look at ECGs and see patterns and things that
Mhm.
just we can't see and with the naked eye, because it can look, to your point, it can look at streaming data endlessly, not get fatigued and not miss something, and really quantify small changes as opposed to just making it qualitative. So, but still explainable, right? It's all related to the electrophysiology of the heart. So I think those are applications that really have the chance to meaningfully improve clinical diagnostics and clinical care. Are these sorts of tools that are just going to make us more efficient, more accurate, give clearer answers, I should say, to patients. So, it's exciting. It's a bit daunting, but to me, it's just opening up a whole new armamentarium of tools that we would have that, gosh, when you and I were in medical school, we would never have even
Yeah,
conceived of.
not at all. I don't think I had a cell phone though when I was in medical school.
No, no. I was actually a resident when I bought a car, that used car that had a phone in it. And I was so excited to be driving around calling people from my phone, from my car. They couldn't believe I was calling from the car. So yeah, we've come a long way.
We've come a long way. Well, on that topic, it's great that we have this at Mayo Clinic and that other large healthcare institutions are using this. But there's been more discussion about how we're not all parts of the world has access to what we have. And there was a recent New York Times article really about the global AI divide. And part of it is just lack of resources, because if you look at AI data centers, they're huge, they're expensive, they cost tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars to build. They're power hungry. So you may have a data center, but if you can't draw on a steady power supply, you might not be able to run it. And so in this article that I had looked at, really, the AI data centers are only in 16% of all the nations in the world, 32 nations, and it's mostly the United States and China, a little bit in Europe, a little bit in India, very few data centers in Africa, and very few in South America.
Yeah, few if any. I think when that article was published, it might have been none in continental Africa. And it is a disproportionate number even then in the U.S. It's like
Mhm.
U.S., then China, then a
Yep.
smattering in other countries. Essentially, it raises a lot of questions for us in terms of these are technologies hold great promise, but what's the right balance? What's the environmental and economic impact of building some of these things? And then to your point, and as that article and the New York Times really nicely points out, that means that essentially, if you're not in the country that has access to these, you're kind of using things on off times, or you're just not getting access at all, right? And so, if you expect it to be kind of used in kind of seamlessly in care delivery, it has the potential to drive this to divide, and it is probably exacerbated a bit just by where we are these days with trade, and it's more difficult for some of the materials like chips to move across borders and things. So it's something we're going to have to really watch for, right? And especially when you think about how powerful these tools really are in terms of advancing thought and creating thought leadership, essentially manufacturing thought leadership, right? So it's
Mhm.
something we're going to have to really pay attention to.
It's part of that bigger picture of ethics, as you
Yep.
mentioned, because there's the ethics of AI use and deployment and the questions of, is it explainable? Is it ethical? What were the data sets it was trained on? Was it suitable for the population it's being used on? But then it's this larger global questions of, is it ethical for some groups to have AI and others not? And how can we make that more equitable? And yes, I saw that in the article as well. Some people were getting up early in the morning to try to use data centers that they had access to in other countries before the people in that country started waking up and using it, just so they had
Yep.
enough bandwidth to
Yeah,
use it for
exactly.
their own purposes.
Yep. And then coming back to you and I closer to home for our podcast here, is thinking about just again in medicine and in clinical use. The point was made today at the session I went to here, hot off the press at ADLM. One of the panelists made the comment that if we buy an analyzer, we don't expect to just kind of plop it in the lab, plug it in, and start using it, right? We can't. AI is another tool that has to be brought into the right environment. It has to
Mhm.
be validated for that use. To your point, we have to validate it on the patients we're using it on, understanding the data that it was trained on, and we have to monitor it. And so we have to think about if it becomes a resource that has a big impact outside of the lab, in thinking about green hospitals and other things, do we need to be a bit more judicious? Yes, we could use AI for lots of different things, but if it really causes a big drain on resources, should we really be a bit more judicious about where we think it can make the greatest impact for patients and think in that way? So I think there's a role for laboratorians because we live at that intersection of technology and clinical practice, and there's at the same time the need to keep the bigger picture in mind as well.
Yeah, and I think clearly we're going to need to learn to be these technologies are going to need to be more efficient, perhaps use less energy,
Yep.
because if I'm using a whole bathtub full of, natural resources and water just to ask a question about where I should go on vacation this summer, well, and everyone's starting to do that, right? We're all relying
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
Chat GPT and Copilot and Bard and all the other large language models and asking it questions about everyday life. We have to get more efficient. We have to think about global resources and continue to make these so that they're sustainable.
Yeah, totally agree. But and again, going back to where we were a few minutes ago, the flip side is look how fast things have evolved already. So I think that
Mhm.
as much as these things are things that seem like daunting tasks now, probably down the road they're going to be surmounted and there'll be new challenges for us to kind of address. So I think it's really I think it's a very exciting time in healthcare and in the laboratory to see these tools really coming to the fore and getting to play a role in shaping how they're used for patients.
Yeah, it's going to make a big difference. So things to think about, but exciting time to be in healthcare and thinking about how we can be more accurate and sensitive and specific and diagnose conditions for patients, detecting them early. There's a lot of exciting opportunities here.
There is, and like you and I have talked about, the important thing is for us from the laboratory side to make sure we stay informed and stay at the table and contribute the thought leadership that's really needed to shape this very important change
Mhm.
really in our industry or in healthcare.
Yeah. Well, enjoy ADLM, Bill. And yeah, you'll have to fill us in afterwards. We could talk more about AI and all the other cool things you're seeing at our next time we meet.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
All right. Until then, see you later.
Until then, thanks, Bobbi.
Thank you for tuning in to Answers from the Lab. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast and tune in every other Thursday for new episodes.